The story you are about to hear was carefully written with a unique science fiction narrative, far from classic patterns, offering a journey beyond familiar storytelling paths. The war did not end with a cheer. It ended with a notification chime that refused to stop echoing through Commander Darius's helmet, each tone announcing another confirmation, another sector secured, another enemy signal gone quiet. He stood on the ridge above the shattered valley, armor dusted gray, boots sinking slightly into soil that had been ionized twice and forgiven by nobody. Victory, it turned out, smelled like burned metal and wet stone. He muted the helmet. The silence that followed felt heavier than artillery. Behind him, medics moved between stretchers with the efficient impatience of people who had already accepted they could not save everyone. Darius watched them longer than necessary, partly because it felt appropriate, and partly because no one was asking him questions yet. The universe had not noticed the war was over. It was still doing whatever it wanted. His wrist console pulsed again. A final report slid into view, stamped in 3 languages and 1 set of alien ideograms he could read only because someone, years ago, had decided commanders should learn the basics of their allies' writing systems. It confirmed what he already knew. The enemy coalition had fractured. Their command nodes were gone. The evacuation corridors Darius had forced through enemy space, against every aggressive instinct in his own fleet, had held. Civilian arcs were already dispersing toward neutral systems. He exhaled. "Good," he muttered to no one. A junior officer jogged up the ridge, skidded slightly, then recovered with dignity that did not quite survive the attempt. "Sir," she said, saluting, "Fleet Command is requesting your presence via holo, immediately." "Tell Fleet Command I'm currently busy standing in a historically significant pile of rubble," Darius said. "They can wait 2 minutes." She blinked. "Sir?" "I'm joking," he said. "Mostly, set it up." The holo flickered to life, then died, then flickered again in a way that suggested the battlefield was interfering with at least 3 laws of physics and several of Fleet Command's expectations. Faces appeared, some human, some not, all tired. Applause began somewhere and spread awkwardly, stopping in fits when people remembered applause felt wrong while bodies were still being counted. Darius raised a hand. "Don't," he said. "We're not done yet. We've stopped the shooting. That's not the same thing." That earned him a few nods and at least one annoyed sigh from an admiral who preferred cleaner endings. The discussion that followed was dense with logistics, accusations lightly disguised as questions, and the familiar undertone of people deciding how to tell the story later. Darius answered where he could, deflected where he didn't feel like participating, and ended the call the moment someone suggested pursuing the retreating enemy remnants for completeness. When the holo vanished, the quiet returned, until it didn't. He sensed her before he saw her, which irritated him. Queens were not supposed to be stealthy. They were supposed to arrive with banners, guards, and enough ceremony to trip over. Instead, Queen Elara of the Aurelian Compact stood a few paces away, hands folded calmly, long ears rising through the gentle shimmer of her field mantle like elegant punctuation marks. She looked almost human, which was always unsettling. The same number of limbs, the same posture, the same faint lines of fatigue around her eyes. Only the ears broke the illusion, long and expressive, angled slightly backward now in what Darius had learned meant focus. "Commander Darius," she said. Her voice was even, carrying easily over the wind. "I hear you've won my war." He stared for a half-second too long, then gestured vaguely at the valley. "I'd argue we collectively didn't lose it," he said. "Winning implies enthusiasm." One corner of her mouth twitched. "You diverted 3 human battle groups to escort civilian arcs belonging to worlds not formally under my protection." "Yes," he said. "I also rerouted medical ships that were technically off-duty and stole fuel from my own reserve. I'm expecting several stern letters." "You disobeyed standing orders." "Also yes. You reduced projected civilian casualties by 72%. "That number seems optimistic," he said. "I was hoping for 60. She studied him, her gaze sharp and unblinking. For a moment, Darius wondered if this was the part where he was formally reprimanded by an alien monarch in front of everyone, which would be a new personal achievement. Instead, she stepped closer, boots crunching softly on broken stone. "Do you know," Allara said, How many commanders I have met who would have taken the opportunity to finish the enemy at any cost? I imagine the number is uncomfortably high, Darius replied. In their defense, annihilation is very satisfying on paper. Her ears angled forward. You chose preservation over conquest. I chose not to explain to my conscience why victory required children dying in evacuation corridors, he said. It's very stubborn about that sort of thing. There was a pause. Wind tugged at Allara's robes. Somewhere below, someone laughed, a sudden sound that felt almost rude. Elara, she said after a moment. Not your majesty. Not here. He nodded. Darius. And if anyone asks, we discussed weather patterns. She surprised him by laughing. It was brief but real. Walk with me, she said. They moved along the ridge side by side, the wreckage below them slowly cooling. Darius noticed distantly that her guards were nowhere to be seen and wondered if that was confidence or exhaustion, possibly both. I have carried something with me throughout this campaign, Elara said, as if continuing a conversation already in progress. Something old, something my predecessors feared to use. Darius raised an eyebrow. Is this the part where you tell me I'm standing too close to a cultural artifact? No, she said. This is the part where I tell you that you are being watched far more closely than you realized. He snorted. I assumed that was always the case. Comes with the rank. She stopped walking. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into a small inner pocket of her robes. Darius felt an inexplicable tightening in his chest, the way he did before orbital strikes, except there were no targeting warnings, no alarms. Just expectation. Whatever she was holding, it had waited a very long time. Darius learned very quickly that surviving a war did not grant immunity from meetings. If anything, it made people more eager to put him in rooms with uncomfortable chairs and worse lighting. The first post-war council session took place aboard a temporary orbital station whose designers had clearly hated organic spines. Darius shifted in his seat for the third time and wondered if this was an interrogation technique disguised as furniture. Across the chamber, Queen Elara sat with unshakable composure, long ears relaxed, hands resting lightly on the armrests, as if gravity itself were optional for her. Advisors ringed the room in neat tiers, human officers, alien envoys, and several species Darius still privately referred to as the ones with too many joints. Every screen displayed casualty figures, reconstruction estimates, and territorial maps that someone had already colored optimistically. The meeting droned on. Words like stabilization corridor, transitional authority, and provisional mandate were deployed with enthusiasm. Darius listened, responded when directly addressed, and otherwise focused on the impressive feat of staying awake. At some point, he became aware that Allara was watching him again. You look uncomfortable, Commander, she said, her voice cutting cleanly through overlapping arguments. That's because I am, he replied without hesitation. This chair is an act of aggression. A ripple of muted reactions passed through the room. One human general coughed loudly. An alien delegate clicked in amusement. Allara tilted her head, studying the chair as if considering its guilt. Noted, she said. We will add ergonomic reform to the Reconstruction agenda. Darius gave her a grateful nod. My lumbar region thanks the crown. The meeting ended several hours later with no fewer than 9 committees formed and no fewer than 10 unresolved disputes politely deferred. As people filed out, Allara gestured for Darius to follow her. He did, resisting the urge to limp theatrically. They walked through a quieter corridor, its walls alive with slow-moving light patterns designed to calm multiple species at once. Darius found them faintly hypnotic and suspected this was intentional. You were unusually quiet in there, Allara said. I was conserving energy, he replied. Also, every time I considered speaking, someone used the phrase, acceptable losses, and I decided silence was safer for everyone. Her ears angled back slightly. You dislike the phrase. I dislike the mindset, he said. Losses are real people until the moment they're summarized. She stopped near a viewport overlooking a construction swarm, hundreds of drones rebuilding the station in real time. That is why I asked you here. Because I'm unpleasant in meetings? Because you are not, she said, useful in the ways they expect. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the drones stitch metal like fabric. Darius scratched at the edge of his glove. If this is where you tell me I've accidentally offended half your court, I'd prefer to sit down first. Elara allowed herself a small smile. You have offended most of my court. Accidentally implies a lack of consistency. Good, he said. I'd hate to be sloppy. She turned to face him fully. Up close, the subtle differences were clearer. The faintly opalescent sheen of her skin, the way her pupils adjusted not to light but to emotional emphasis. Her ears shifted as she spoke, punctuating thoughts he was still learning to read. The role you played in this war was unconventional, she said. You treated my people as people, not assets. I find it's easier that way, Darius said. Assets complain less when they're alive. A soft sound escaped her that might have been a laugh. You realize how dangerous that perspective is? I'm told that often, he said, usually by people with very clean hands. They resumed walking, this time toward a private chamber that looked suspiciously like a library. Shelves curved along the walls filled with data crystals, physical books, and artifacts that radiated quiet importance. Darius slowed instinctively, careful not to touch anything. This is where I think, Allara said. It is also where my predecessors stored their regrets. That's a heavy collection, he said. Do you alphabetize those? Chronologically, she replied. Regret evolves. She moved to one of the shelves and removed a small, unassuming case. Darius felt a flicker of recognition. This was not the first time she had reached into her robes like this. He straightened despite himself. You looked surprised earlier, she said, without opening the case. I was trying not to look alarmed, he admitted. Queens rarely carry small, mysterious objects unless they're about to change someone's life. Or end it, she added calmly. See, that's the kind of clarification that would have been helpful earlier. She opened the case just enough for him to glimpse the ring inside. It rested on a cushion that seemed grown rather than manufactured, its surface etched with symbols that shimmered faintly, as if reacting to his presence. Darius swallowed. That's not jewelry. No, Elara said. It is law. He exhaled slowly. I was afraid you'd say that. I have carried it for decades, she continued. Waiting. Watching commanders rise and fall, victories won at terrible cost. You were the first to refuse a decisive strike because it endangered civilians who could not repay you. I didn't refuse, he said. I postponed aggressively. Her ears flicked forward. You saved lives without asking what they would give you in return. I asked them to keep breathing, he said. Seemed reasonable. She closed the case again. The ring binds its bearer to the crown, not as a servant, but as a protector. Independent of faction, answerable only to me. Darius stared at the case. You realize I'm human. Yes, she said. That is not a flaw. It's usually a political inconvenience, he said. Exactly. He laughed then, a short, disbelieving sound. You watched me reroute fleets and decided I should have more responsibility? I watched you choose restraint, she said, and I decided the future should be defended by someone who understands its fragility. Darius leaned against the shelf, careful not to dislodge history. I'm going to need more details, he said, preferably written, with footnotes. Allara smiled, just slightly. You will receive them, along with enemies you have not yet imagined. Fantastic, he said. I was worried peace might be boring. She stepped closer, the case still closed between them, and for the first time since the war ended, Darius felt the unmistakable sense that the hardest part was just beginning. Darius did not sleep well that night, which felt unfair given that the universe had finally stopped trying to kill him. The guest quarters assigned to him were larger than his ship's command deck and quieter than any place had a right to be. The ceiling projected a slow rotation of unfamiliar constellations, meant to calm visiting species by reminding them that space was vast and patient. Darius lay on the bed staring at it, mentally rearranging stars into shapes that looked suspiciously like tactical diagrams. At some point he gave up, sat up, and addressed the empty room. You could have at least given me nightmares, he said. That would have felt familiar. The room, showing admirable restraint, did not answer. He was halfway through a cup of something that tasted like tea after an argument when the chime sounded. Before he could respond, the door slid open with polite inevitability. Allara stepped inside, unaccompanied, her expression composed and alert in a way that suggested she, too, had slept poorly, but had decided not to complain about it. "You're awake," she said. "I was unconscious for several hours," he replied. "It didn't take." She glanced at the cup in his hand. "Is that the station's hospitality drink?" "Yes," he said. "I believe it's designed to offend everyone equally." She inclined her head. "An impressive diplomatic achievement." She gestured and the door sealed behind her. The privacy field hummed to life, subtle but unmistakable. Darius set the cup aside, suddenly aware that whatever came next would not involve committees. "Allara," he said carefully, "if this is about the ring again, I should warn you that I react poorly to life-altering decisions before breakfast." "It is about the ring," she said, "and it is not breakfast. See, that's already unsettling." She crossed the room and set the small case on the table between them. The material responded to her touch, unfolding smoothly, revealing the ring once more. In the softer light, its surface seemed deeper, layered, as if history itself had weight. "You asked for details," she said. "I will give you some. Not all. Some truths function better when discovered slowly." "That's ominous," Darius said, "but please continue." "The Protectorate was created at a time when the crown was fragile," Allara said. "My people had survived a collapse. Trust was scarce. Power was dangerous. The ring was meant to bind a single individual to the task of preservation. Of the monarch, yes, but also of the balance that allowed civilization to continue." "And then it stopped being used," Darius said. "Yes," she replied, "because those chosen before you forgot the difference between protection and control." He absorbed that in silence. "So you decided to outsource." Her eyes sharpened. "I decided to choose someone who would not see my throne as a prize." Darius leaned back in his chair. "You're aware this will make me extremely unpopular." "You already are," she said. "This will simply clarify the reasons." She lifted the ring. The symbols along its surface shifted, aligning, responding to proximity in a way that made the air feel slightly warmer. Darius's wrist console flickered to life, alarmed, then went dark as if chastened. "It will bind to you," Allara said. "Biologically, legally. It will recognize you as protector. You will have authority that supersedes military command when the crown is at risk." "And if I abuse that authority?" he asked. The slightest pause. "Then I will remove it," she said. "Or die trying." He laughed despite himself. "That's reassuring in a deeply concerning way." She held the ring out to him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched, filled with the distant hum of the station and the even more distant work of rebuilding worlds. "I should say no," Darius said quietly. "Yes," Allara agreed. "You should." "And if I do?" "Then the court will fracture," she said. "Rival factions will test me. Reconstruction will slow. Old enemies will sense weakness. Lives will be lost. Gradually, politely." He closed his eyes. "You really know how to sell a role." "I know how to be honest," she said. He opened his eyes and met her gaze. "You're gambling." "Yes," she said, "on you." "Bad habit," he muttered, then extended his hand. "Which finger?" She hesitated just a fraction, then guided the ring onto his hand. The moment it touched his skin, the world shifted. Not dramatically. No blinding light. No thunderous proclamation. Instead, a quiet pressure settled into place, like something ancient recognizing a long-anticipated answer. Symbols flared briefly, then sank beneath the surface of the ring. Darius felt a cascade of information brush against his awareness. Laws, protocols, permissions, before retreating, leaving behind a sense of alignment. He exhaled sharply. "I don't hate it," he said. "That worries me." The station reacted next. Lights adjusted. Systems acknowledged a new authority. Somewhere, very far away, someone would be staring at a console in confusion. Elara released his hand, her ears angled forward, attentive, almost hopeful. "How does it feel?" "Like I just signed a contract written by a civilization with a very long memory," he said, "and no return policy." She smiled openly now. "Welcome, Protector." He looked down at the ring, then back at her. "You realize," and he said, "that this means I'm going to ask very annoying questions." I am counting on it, she replied. Outside the viewport, construction drones continued their patient work, unaware that something older than war had just awakened, binding two people together not by romance, but by trust, and by the shared understanding that the future was fragile and worth defending. Darius discovered that becoming the Queen's protector did not come with a handbook, but it did come with a schedule. It was a deeply aggressive schedule, filled with briefings labeled essential, urgent, and most ominously, ceremonial. He stared at the projected list hovering above the table in his new office and felt a familiar battlefield sensation, the certainty that something was about to explode, and it would probably be his fault. The office itself was an architectural compromise between species. One wall curved gently inward, apparently comforting to the Aurelians. Another wall stubbornly refused to curve at all, a concession to humans who distrusted rooms that looked like they might close their jaws. The desk responded to his presence by adjusting its height, then adjusting again, then giving up and staying slightly too low. Darius leaned on it anyway. The ring on his finger pulsed faintly, as if amused. "Don't start," he told it. "I'm still deciding if I like you." The first assassination attempt happened before midday, which felt almost polite. Darius sensed it rather than saw it, a ripple of intent, a tightening in the ring that translated itself into a sudden, absolute certainty that standing exactly where he was would be a poor life choice. He stepped to the side just as a filament round punched through the air where his head had been, embedding itself in the far wall with a hiss of displaced molecules. He stared at the smoking indentation. "Rude," he said. Security flooded the corridor seconds later, weapons raised, expressions oscillating between horror and professional embarrassment. Allara arrived not long after, calm as ever, her long ears angled sharply forward as she took in the damage. "Are you injured?" she asked. "Only emotionally," Darius said, "and possibly structurally, depending on how much that wall cost." She examined the impact site. "That was a court-grade weapon." "Of course it was," he replied. "I'd have been offended by anything less." The would-be assassin, it turned out, was a minor noble from a peripheral system who believed the protectorate appointment invalidated 3 separate inheritance claims and 1 extremely elaborate marriage contract. Darius listened to the explanation with the air of a man discovering that peace had a very strange sense of humor. "So," he said, when the briefing concluded, "to summarize, I exist, therefore someone's ancestral plans are ruined." "Yes," Allara said. "Welcome to governance." The second attempt was subtler and involved poison wine, which Darius avoided purely because he disliked the smell. He held the glass up, sniffed it, and frowned. "This reminds me of fuel additives," he said, "and betrayal." Elara did not drink hers either. By the third attempt, Darius began to sense a pattern. Not just hostility, but testing. Probes sent by factions that wanted to know what kind of protector he would be. Violent, careless, predictable. They would be disappointed. Instead of retaliating with force, Darius requested meetings with everyone, nobles, guild representatives, military leaders, and at least one individual who introduced themselves as a cultural continuity consultant and refused to explain what that meant. He listened more than he spoke, made notes no one could read over his shoulder, and occasionally asked questions so blunt they caused actual coughing fits. At one such meeting, an elder statesman leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You are a foreigner," he said. "You wear our law like an ornament. Why should we accept your authority?" Darius smiled politely. "Because if you don't," he said, "you'll spend the next decade fighting shadows instead of rebuilding cities. And because I don't want your throne." A ripple passed through the chamber. "I don't want it," Darius continued. "I don't want your titles, your bloodlines, or your beautifully complicated grudges. I want people to stop dying in clever ways." Later, walking back through the corridors, Allara regarded him thoughtfully. "You are making enemies," she said. "I'm streamlining," he replied. "Enemies are more efficient when they're honest." Not all danger came with weapons. Some arrived as tradition. Darius was informed, after the fact, that he was required to attend a formal convocation wearing ceremonial armor that had last been worn by a protector several centuries ago. The armor was beautiful, ornate, and utterly incompatible with his shoulders. He struggled into it while attendants watched with visible concern. If I dislocate something, he said, tell history I died bravely. Elara watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable, until he finally emerged, the armor sitting just slightly wrong, as if history itself were squinting. You look formidable, she said. I look like a statue that regrets leg day, he replied. Is this necessary? Yes, she said. Symbolism matters. Then symbolically, he said, the civilization owes me a chiropractor. The convocation itself was a storm of color, sound, and ritualized tension. Darius stood at Alara's side, acutely aware of how many eyes tracked his movements, how many calculations adjusted with each breath he took. The ring was warm now, a steady presence, translating threats into instinct, caution into clarity. When a delegation attempted to publicly challenge Ilara's authority, Darius did not reach for a weapon. He reached for silence. He stepped forward, raised a hand, and waited. The chamber quieted, slowly, reluctantly. I am not here to rule you, he said. I am here to ensure you survive yourselves. There was laughter then, scattered but real. Tension eased, just enough. That night, as the station lights dimmed and the reconstruction drones continued their tireless work, Darius stood alone at a viewport, watching stars drift past. Elara joined him, her presence quiet. You could have responded with force, she said. Many expected it. I know, he replied. That's why I didn't. She studied him, her ears relaxing. You are changing the shape of this role. Good, he said. It was overdue. Outside, the future waited, dangerous, political, and stubbornly alive. And for the first time since the war ended, Darius felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not peace, not certainty, responsibility. It sat there heavily, but not unbearably. And for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, he suspected that was exactly how it was meant to feel. Reconstruction turned out to be louder than war. Darius had expected grief, anger, and the brittle politeness of former enemies forced to share oxygen. He had not expected arguments over atmospheric humidity, trade corridor naming rights, or whether a planet that had been bombarded twice should still be considered a cultural heritage site or merely very stubborn debris. He stood at the center of a circular operations hub, watching half a dozen holographic worlds rotate slowly, each tagged with requests that blinked impatiently. This one needs food processors, said a logistics officer. That one needs soil detoxification, said another. That one, Darius said, pointing at a flickering red icon, needs everyone to stop arguing long enough to land. The ring warmed faintly as if agreeing. Elara entered the hub without announcement, her long ears lifting slightly as she took in the noise. The room quieted, not because she demanded it, but because her presence had acquired a certain gravity. Darius noticed, with a mix of pride and unease, that some of that gravity now bled toward him as well. You're frowning, she observed. I'm budgeting, he replied. It has that effect. She joined him at the central console, studying the projections. You're prioritizing mixed population worlds. Yes, he said. If they survive together, they'll be harder to separate later. And if they don't, then we learn very loudly what not to do again. She regarded him for a moment, then nodded. You're rewriting several doctrines. I find doctrines improve with editing, he said, especially the parts written during panics. Their partnership settled into a rhythm that surprised them both. Allara handled the ceremonial weight of rulership, the speeches, the ancient protocols that soothed her people by existing. Darius handled the practical chaos, supply chains, security compromises, and the deeply human tendency to turn relief efforts into competitions. He mediated disputes with a bluntness that confused alien diplomats and delighted overworked engineers. During one particularly tense negotiation between two factions arguing over orbital space, Darius leaned forward and said, "If you keep shouting, I'm going to assign you both the same docking bay and let physics decide." There was silence, then reluctant laughter, then agreement. Not everyone was amused. Reports began to filter in, coordinated delays, misinformation campaigns, subtle sabotage framed as bureaucratic error. Rival factions were moving carefully now, no longer trying to remove Darius outright, but attempting to undermine the systems he helped build. He responded by making those systems transparent, boring, and stubbornly fair. Transparency is dangerous, one advisor warned. So is opacity, Darius replied. At least this way, everyone can see who's lying. Late one cycle, long after the hub had emptied, Darius found Allara alone in her private chamber, standing before a projection of her homeworld. The image showed continents scarred by past wars, oceans still recovering their color. You could have chosen one of them, he said quietly. She did not turn. Yes. They would have obeyed tradition. Yes. And they would have used this role to settle old scores? She faced him then, her expression tired but steady. You see why I did not. He nodded. You chose an outsider, so no one could claim you favored their history. I chose you, she corrected, because you see me as a responsibility, not a symbol. He huffed a soft laugh. Careful. Compliment me too much and I'll start making speeches. Please don't, she said dryly. They stood together watching the projection. Do you regret it? He asked. No, she said without hesitation. Do you? He considered the ring, the weight of authority it carried, the enemies it attracted. Ask me again after the next crisis, he said. I'm developing a pattern. The crisis came sooner than expected. A reconstruction convoy vanished en route to a contested system, its distress beacon activating only long enough to transmit fragments. Panic spread quickly. Accusations followed faster. Darius moved immediately, coordinating search efforts, deploying scouts, and issuing a public statement that managed to be calm, firm, and irritatingly reasonable. When the convoy was found, disabled, not destroyed, its disappearance engineered to provoke distrust, Darius chose restraint again. He exposed the manipulation, traced it back to its architects, and handed the evidence to Allara's court instead of acting unilaterally. You could have ended them, one security chief said. Yes, Darius replied, and then they'd be martyrs. This way, they're footnotes. The court proceedings were tense but decisive. Several powerful figures were stripped of influence. Some left quietly. Others stayed, suddenly cooperative. That evening, as reconstruction drones stitched light across the void, Allara joined Darius on a balcony overlooking the station. The stars were sharp and close, as if listening. You are teaching my people something, she said. What's that? That power can be exercised without being displayed. He smiled faintly. It's a niche skill. She glanced at him, ears angled in a way he'd learned meant sincerity. You are making this possible, and you're letting me, he replied. That's not nothing. They stood there, not touching, not distant either, bound by something older than affection and newer than tradition. Below them, worlds rebuilt themselves piece by piece. Above them, the future waited, impatient but open. Darius rested his forearms on the railing. You know, he said, if this works, it's going to annoy a lot of historians. Allara's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. Then we are doing something right. The warning did not arrive as a siren or an explosion. It arrived as a pause. Darius noticed it while reviewing orbital traffic, an absence where there should have been noise, a pattern too clean to be accidental. The ring on his finger warmed, not sharply, but with the quiet insistence of something tapping on the inside of his awareness. Elara, he said, activating the secure channel, something's wrong. I know, she replied at once. The Western delegations have stopped arguing. He exhaled. That bad. They converged in the operations chamber, where the usual chaos of overlapping voices had been replaced by an uneasy stillness. Displays showed fleets holding position, communications delayed by polite technical excuses, and one particularly ambitious faction requesting an unscheduled audience to address matters of continuity. That's not a phrase you use unless you're about to break something, Darius muttered. The coup, when it came, was almost tasteful. No open violence, no dramatic seizures of power, just a carefully timed declaration invoking ancient clauses, supported by a coalition of houses that had decided Allara's reforms were moving too quickly, and that her protector was an unacceptable variable. A formal transmission filled the chamber, its speaker draped in ceremonial colors and confidence. For the stability of the compact, the speaker intoned, we hereby suspend. No, Darius said, cutting the feed. Several advisors gasped. Someone swore softly. Elara looked at him, her long ears lifting in surprise. You are aware that was a historical first. Happy to contribute, he said. They're testing boundaries. If we let them set the pace, they'll keep tightening the room until we can't breathe. Security reports streamed in. Administrative takeovers, loyalist confusion, carefully engineered delays meant to paralyze response without firing a shot. The ring pulsed again, offering options Darius deliberately ignored. You could override them, Allara said quietly. The ring would allow it. I know, he replied, and that's exactly why I won't. She studied him, searching for doubt. This could cost you. It already has, he said, but if I seize power now, I prove every fear they have about this role. Outside the chamber, a small explosion rattled the station. Controlled, contained, symbolic. The kind of noise meant to hurry decisions. Darius straightened. Open a channel to everyone. Moments later, his image appeared across networks, human and alien alike. He looked tired, slightly rumpled, and very human. I'm aware some of you believe the compact is at risk, he began. You're right, it is. Not because of reform, but because you're afraid of it. The feed lit up with reactions. I was given authority to protect the crown, he continued, not to replace it, not to rule you. And if you're hoping I'll use this ring to force compliance, you're misunderstanding both it and me. A pause, deliberate. If you want to challenge Allara's leadership, do it openly. Argue, vote, protest, but stop sabotaging the people trying to rebuild your worlds. That's not preservation. That's vanity. The silence that followed was not empty. It was listening. The response was messy. Some factions backed down immediately. Others doubled down, attempting to mobilize forces under the guise of legality. When one such fleet broke formation and accelerated toward the station, Darius finally acted. Not with domination. He rerouted every supply line that fleet depended on. Fuel shipments stalled. Maintenance crews were reassigned. Communication bandwidth narrowed to a trickle. Within hours, the fleet found itself intact, armed, and completely irrelevant. Elara watched the updates scroll past. You neutralized them without firing a shot, Darius shrugged. Turns out logistics is the most terrifying weapon. The standoff ended not with surrender, but with exhaustion. The coup unraveled under its own complexity. Its architects were exposed not as martyrs, but as inconveniences, inefficient, impatient, and increasingly alone. In the aftermath, Allara convened the council. Darius stood beside her, the ring steady, quiet. You could have taken more, she said softly once they were alone again. They would have accepted it. I know, he said. That's why I didn't. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then inclined her head in a gesture that was neither royal nor ceremonial. It was personal. You protected the future, she said, even from yourself. He managed a tired smile. I'm learning. Later, as repair crews patched the last of the station's damage, Darius leaned against a viewport, watching stars drift past in their indifferent patience. Allara joined him, the crisis finally ebbing. For the record, he said, if this happens again, I'm instituting a mandatory waiting period before anyone is allowed to overthrow anything. She let out a quiet laugh. A radical proposal. They stood there, bound by choice rather than force, aware that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the discipline to survive it without becoming what they feared. The ring remained warm on his finger, not triumphant, not demanding, simply present. The star maps no longer looked like battlefields. Darius noticed that first, standing in the quiet planning chamber while the station rotated gently beneath his feet. The projections showed trade routes instead of firing arcs, population flows instead of evacuation vectors, Reconstruction timelines layered where kill zones used to be. Space felt orderly, not safe, never that, but deliberate. He rested his hands on the console and waited for the discomfort that usually followed that thought. It didn't come. You're smiling, Allara said from behind him. That's concerning, he replied. It usually means I've missed something catastrophic. She stepped beside him, long ears relaxed, posture unburdened in a way it hadn't been when they first met on the battlefield ridge. For once, she said, nothing is on fire. He glanced at her. I don't trust days like that. Neither do I, she said calmly. That is why I scheduled 3 audits and a constitutional vote. Romantic, he said. She almost laughed. The vote was the last loose end, and they both knew it. The protectorate could not remain what it had been, an ancient safeguard wrapped in ambiguity, powerful enough to frighten everyone and accountable enough to tempt abuse. Darius had insisted on limits. Allara had agreed, even when her advisors warned it would weaken her position. Instead, it changed it. The chamber filled slowly with delegates, human and alien, familiar faces and former adversaries now sharing space without visible hostility. When Allara rose, the room quieted. Not out of fear, but habit earned through consistency. She spoke of preservation, of trust rebuilt not through force, but through systems that resisted corruption by design. She spoke of the protector not as an enforcer, but as a constraint, a role bound by law, ethics, and transparency. Then she yielded the floor. Darius cleared his throat, suddenly aware that this was the first time he'd addressed the compact without armor, without the background hum of emergency. I was given a ring, he said, holding up his hand. The symbols glimmered softly. It came with authority older than most of your stars. A few murmurs. I could have used it to end arguments, he continued, to accelerate decisions, to silence opposition. That would have been efficient. It also would have proven you right to fear it. He met eyes across the chamber, unflinching. So we're changing it. The protector answers to the crown, but the crown answers to the law, and the law answers to the people it protects. Silence followed, then slowly, assent. The vote passed. Not unanimously, nothing ever was, but decisively enough that history would remember it as inevitable. Later, much later, the station dimmed into its artificial night cycle. Darius found Allara on the balcony overlooking the Reconstruction docks, where new ships gleamed under patient starlight. It's done, she said. It's begun, he corrected. That's always the trick. She turned to him, studying him with an expression that carried memory. You are not the same commander who stood on that ridge. No, he said. I stand slightly straighter now. Less debris in my boots. Her ears angled in amusement. You learned restraint. I learned responsibility doesn't end when the shooting stops, he said. And that power feels lighter when you don't carry it alone. She nodded. And I learned that leadership does not require isolation. They stood there, the silence comfortable. The ring rested cool against his finger now, not dormant, but settled, like a promise that no longer needed proving. Will you keep it? She asked. He considered the question, then the horizon. As long as it's needed, he said, and only as long. That was the correct answer, she said. I'm growing, he replied. It's alarming. Below them, a mixed-species crew launched the first civilian transport to a rebuilt world. Humans and Aurelians working side by side, arguing cheerfully over procedures that no longer involve survival. Darius watched the ship vanish into hyperspace. You know, he said, somewhere out there, someone is very annoyed that this worked. Elara smiled, small and genuine. Let them be annoyed. The future stretched wide and uncertain, but no longer directionless. Darius felt the weight of his choices settle into something steadier than duty. Not a crown, not a throne. A hand on the balance, keeping it from tipping too far again. And for the first time since the war ended, that felt like enough.